Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian, and we have new digs now. I keep saying we, it's just me here, but yeah, kind of a different situation here. Hopefully, this will be an improvement in some small way. But you can't improve the past, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to tell you about it. So, welcome back to this new episode. We're going to have three parts today. We're going to be talking about Section 27 of the Doctrine and Covenants, Section 28 in the Doctrine and Covenants. But in between those two, we're going to be talking about a couple of very interesting documents and a bit of a story. Sometimes the story about the papers that we have is just as interesting as what they say. So, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about, those three things today. Section 27, some intermediary things, and Section 28. So hopefully we're going to have a rip-roaringly good time today. So by way of introduction for our papers, Section 27, the earliest copy that we have is from Revelation Book 1. It is shown as the 28th commandment, which was given in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And as you could probably see here, there's not a whole lot of changes to the text. Some spelling things, not a whole lot of major changes. Pretty clean copy coming into. Now, the originals are lost at this point in time, but we do have this as like what we printed from. And it's just interesting to note that some of these revelations didn't really have a whole lot of alterations to them, especially considering things like, the Articles and Covenants. You'd think they'd be going over those over and over again. But anyway, so not a whole lot of anything except for grammatical and spelling changes. It is chapter 28 in the Book of Commandments, and it is section 50, section L, section 50 in the Doctrine and Covenants in 1835, where we get some fun like other sources of this, which is fun. The Evening and Morning Star. This is a church periodical that was put out from 1833. In this case, actually has the same text as Revelation Book 1. And if you recall from a little while ago, the Painesville Telegraph came into our lives, and Section 20 was in the Painesville Telegraph, and Section 27, this section that we have here before us right now, is also attached to this. I guess they thought it was all one, and which is fine because it has to do with the sacrament, which, is something that we do every week in the church. So those are our sources. Now, what's interesting about this, and again, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, this will be an easy section to cover. I should probably just not think about that. So Revelation Book 1, we get a version of this, and you might notice it's a kind of short. Chapter 28 in the Book of Commandments, kind of short. Evening and Morning Star, kind of short. Painesville Telegraph, kind of short. And then you get to 1835, and you get to the Doctrine and Covenants, and suddenly it is far longer than it used to be. So there is a difference between kind of the original publications and what's in the Doctrine and Covenants. So if you read the current section heading for this, you'll note that it says, hey, I received part of this, and then the rest of it was received later in September. So this is another one of those revelations that was modified. And in this case, added to it. Modified would imply that they went back and changed language, but they definitely added something to it. And what I like about how they did it is this. So in let's just say the Revelation Book 1, or if you will, the Book of Commandments, the official stuff here. At the end of it, it says, I will drink of the fruit of the vine with you on the earth, with all those whom my Father hath given me out of the world. And instead of that, what you get is a description of all those whom my Father hath given me out of the world. So in the original is basically that, and then, be sure to be prepared, and then amen, and we're done. That's it. In the newer version of it, what we have is like a description of all these people who are taken out of the world, and also a kind of a reference to the New Testament, which we'll get in a second, called the armor of God. So I'll describe that in a moment. So instead of just saying, whom my Father hath given me out of the world, section 50 from the Doctrine and Covenants, what we now call section 27, elucidates a lot of these people. So who are they? Well, you have Moroni, which they say holds the keys to the stick of Ephraim, which we now interpret to be the Book of Mormon itself. The stick of Judah is what we would call the Bible. The stick of Ephraim is the Book of Mormon. So that's Moroni's job. And then he says, with Elias, and he has the key to bringing to pass the restoration of all things concerning the last days. You have John the Baptist, which had already come to them, who holds the keys of the Aaronic priesthood, so that's already been done. You have Elijah turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers. He later on appears on the scene when the Kirtland Temple is dedicated. That's a whole section. That's a whole story in itself, but that actually does come to pass. He actually does manifest himself later on in the narrative. With Joseph, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, your fathers, quote unquote, your fathers. He actually talks about Michael or Adam, who's the father of all and the Ancient of Days. So this statement, Ancient of Days, comes originally, I believe, from the book of Daniel. And we, in the Latter-day Saint faith, believe that Adam, Michael, Ancient of Days, all the same person. So that's a unique thing for us, I believe. Maybe it's not unique to us, but we're the only faith that I know of that equates all of these together. Then you have Peter, James, and John, ordained and confirmed Oliver and Joseph to be apostles, along with the keys of the kingdom and the dispensation of the gospel. So another thing is that John the Baptist shows up, he gives his keys and ordains to the Aaronic priesthood. Peter, James, and John come and ordain to the Melchizedek priesthood. And for all intents and purposes, we kind of feel that sort of restored enough to get the church back on earth again after it had apostatized. So that's the narrative. Those are the people, apparently, that are listed out and described in a lot more detail in this section of the Doctrine and Covenants. So there's a bit of a change there in the papers. So the length of them is very different between the first four, we would say, Revelation book, Book of Commandments, Evening and Morning Star, Painesville Telegraph, and then everything coming afterwards is a lot more detailed about that. And we'll get into that in a little bit more. So that edition, with all of the length in it, all of the armor of God and sort of enumerating who these people are, is what we currently use in the 2013 edition, in the 1981 edition, and so forth. What's also interesting is that the manuscript history uses that version and even sort of explains, and I'll get to that in a moment, that the rest of it was received later on. So we have kind of a little bit of it, and then it says, well, instead of just these people and, prepare yourselves, we're going to really kind of expand on that. So that is the sort of papers introduction. There is also no section heading difference between 1981 and 2013, so the church made no change to this when the Joseph Smith papers came out, with the exception, of course, of removing the history of the church reference. So circumstantial introduction to section 27. Revelation book 1, the introduction from there says, a revelation to the church given at Harmony, Susquehanna County, state of Pennsylvania, given to Joseph the seer at the time that he went to purchase wine it for sacrament, and he was stopped by an angel, and that's not a joke, it's just two he's, spoke to him as follows, saying, and then you get a revelation. Book of Commandments and the 1835 edition, they make no mention of a heavenly messenger. It's kind of the same as a lot of other ones where it just says hey, revelation given to Joseph Smith, date, place, that was it. From the manuscript history, we get a little more. So coming from draft 2, draft 1 doesn't really have anything here. It says, early in the month of August, Newell Knight and his wife paid us a visit at my place at Harmony, Pennsylvania. And as neither his wife nor mine had been as yet confirmed, it was proposed that we should confirm them and partake together of the sacrament. Before he and his wife should leave us, in order to prepare for this, I set out to go procure some wine for the occasion, but had gone but only a short distance when I was met by a heavenly messenger and received the following revelation, the first paragraph of which was written at this time, and the remainder in the September following. So a heavenly messenger kind of stops him on the way, grocery shopping, if you will, for wine, and sort of tells him a message. So this is another interesting one. This is not a Urim and Thummim. We're kind of going back to the early days where it was an angel, and we have an excerpt of that. Or I believe he probably wrote out everything that he had at the time, which apparently took a paragraph. Must have been a long paragraph. So what I love too is there's the section is given in the manuscript history, and that's how it is with all the history of the church, if I haven't made that clear. When you were to read, the history of the church, volume 1, like the way they published it, or even the manuscripts that they wrote that we're taking it from, the whole section of the Doctrine and Covenants is there. And in the published versions, there's little notes too. So after that's over with, so section is given, the aftermath of it is very interesting to me as well. It says, in obedience to the above commandment, we prepared some wine of our own make and held our meeting, consisting only of 5, vis-a-vis, Newell Knight and his wife, myself and my wife, and John Whitmer. We partook of the sacrament, after which we confirmed these 2 sisters into the church and spent the evening in a glorious manner. The Spirit of the Lord was poured out upon us. We praised the Lord God and rejoiced exceedingly. So this angel coming down was a meeting of 5 people taking the sacrament. You'd think it would be like a congregation. It wasn't. It was like a meeting at somebody's house taking the sacrament. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And this, again, is Newell Knight, as you recall, participated in a very much big, huge way in the first miracle of the church, which, as some of our commenters have noted, was an exorcism, if you want to use that term. A footnote to this, from the historical introduction of Documents, Volume 1. In 1833, John Murdoch and members of the church in New York, where he was preaching, made their own wine for this purpose. He recalled that, quote, by my advice, the sisters gathered currants and made wine for our communion. So this was immediately put into effect. Like, we're going to start making our own stuff. And I should also say that in the current versions of our scriptures, they will enumerate that in the Latter-day Saint faith, we actually use water instead of wine. But the whole point of this section is it doesn't really matter what you use. I know in some cases people will use Sprite or some sort of a soft drink that's been, sort of filtered and treated because maybe the water was contaminated or whatever the case may be. So anyway, this was taken right away. It's like, yep, we're not going to buy it anymore. We're just going to make our own stuff. And the Revelation kind of talks about it being from your enemies. Then we get into the Joseph Smith Papers historical introduction. So Documents, Volume 1. We get, again, what was in the manuscript history is almost rehashed. And then there's this quote, which I loved. The Revelation told Joseph Smith to use only new wine made by members of the church. Both the dating and the text of this revelation present challenges. The earliest extant copy in Revelation Book 1, the version featured here, dated it broadly to the year 1830, and John Whitmer placed it between revelations dated July and September of 1830. Despite Whitmer's placement, however, the versions published in 1833 in the Evening and Morning Star and the Book of Commandments specified the 4th of September, 1830 as the date. And further to this, in his later history, however, Joseph Smith said that the first paragraph of the 1835 text, quote, was written at this time, so early August of 1830, and the remainder of in the September following. Joseph Smith then affirmed that the first part should be dated August 1830 and the remainder September 1830, in which case the date of 4 September 1830 found the earlier printed versions may have reflected the date of dictation of the second portion. And so it's implied here that that second portion of it was also a revelation. Whether or not it was from an angel, we don't know. So yeah, a lot of very interesting timings here. For starters, I mean, they kind of downplay this in the text, but I'm visualizing this because I'm an amateur historian. But it's like, I'll be right back. I'm going to go get some wine. And he comes back, I guess, without anything and says, hey, an angel just told me we're not doing this anymore. I'm going to write that down if you don't mind. And everybody's like, okay. And then we'll have the sacrament. And it seems like everybody's like really cool about this stuff. But, we have a consolidated history, so I'm sure it wasn't like that. But anyway, just kind of a funny image, not to make light of it too much. But anyway, so let's talk about the content of this thing. So again, as I was saying before, there were a couple of changes made. There were two main changes made to this revelation since it was put in Revelation Book 1. So the original version that we get, the Revelation book, the Painesville Telegraph, Evening Morning Star, Book of Commandments, are all the same. In the second version that we get in 1835, the Doctrine and Covenants expands on those whom my Father hath given me out of the world, right? We have Moroni, Elias, John the Baptist, Elijah, Joseph, Michael, Peter, James, and John, so forth. But it also adds the armor of God. And what this is referring to, if you know the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 11 through 18 in the King James Version of the Bible, talks about this imagery of adding the armor of God. So Revelation book 1 ends it with just, quote, "Wherefore lift up your hearts and rejoice, and gird up your loins, and be faithful until I come, even so, amen." That's the original ending. But what we get is put on the whole armor of God, and it's basically a reflection in a big way about Ephesians chapter 6. So you put on the helmet of salvation and the sword of truth and the shield of gird your loins with, the gospel, your feet with the gospel, the preparation of the gospel of peace. I don't have this memorized, but the point is, that is what is added into it. So we have these kind of 3 sections that are created because of this change made. Not sure about the details of those changes being made, but the original portion of it, which has a lot to do with the sacrament, and then we get sort of a a meal or a coming together at some future day of some worthies from the Bible, as well as this putting on the whole armor of God is all part of section 27, but was not originally in like the Painesville Telegraph or in the Evening and Morning Star. And so just kind of another example of how revelation in the church works in a very different way than a lot of people might think of, in that it can be maybe expanded upon, and that there's no problem with saying, okay, I've received some of it here, and then maybe a month or 2 later, I received the rest of it, and that's what we published. So that is section 27, talking about the sacrament. An angel comes down, apparently, heavenly messengers, they say, and says it doesn't really matter what you have as long as you do it with your eyes single to the glory of God. That's why today we use bread and we use water. And I know in some cases, if people have a celiac issue or some problem with gluten, you'll see maybe a small plastic cup with checks in it, or a gluten-free bread, or whatever it is. We really try to adapt it to whoever we're with. So anyway, some interesting things, some unique things perhaps about the church. And another one of those revelations that takes what I would say would to be a very commonplace thing, something we do every Sunday at church, and turns it into something rather interesting, like a heavenly messenger came down and kind of changed how we did all this. So there you go, section 27 of part 1. Stay tuned for our next part. We're going to be talking not about any revelations, but some intervening documents that are quite interesting. Some real estate going back and forth, and then a really interesting story about Newell Knight's history. So stay tuned.